I mean? It's going down. Album is crazy. It's fire. Can't nobody stop it.
Some controversy with Fat Joe. Now that 300
Always
joint is out.
controversy with Fat Joe, huh?
And we love you for it because you
tell it. It's trash too. I heard that 50 joint is garbage. You know, I just think he should diss me on a hot record.
Okay.
You know, because that is real whack, that record, to be honest with you. Like, it's trash, to be honest with you. The record is whack. It is trash, to be honest with you.
Before the platinum plaques and flashing lights, he was just Joseph Cartagena, a Bronx kid trying to survive what most never could. At only 10 years old, his own father tried to take his life. Yeah, his own father. And years before fame or money, a petty $10 argument left him with 2 bullets in his body. But the danger didn't fade when the spotlight hit. It followed him. Fame brought snakes disguised as friends, loyalty that turned lethal, and tension so real that even 50 Cent's life was once caught in the crossfire. This is where it all begins. Before the world knew Fat Joe, there was just a scared little boy growing up in the South Bronx, one of the toughest places in America. The Bronx of the 70s wasn't just poor, it was on fire, with whole blocks left in ruins. Apartment buildings were literally set on fire for insurance cash, smoke filling the sky while rats and shattered glass covered the streets. Sirens screamed every night in the forest projects, where Joe's family lived. Survival wasn't a choice there. It was the only way to live. Every day he watched people fight, steal, or sprint from the cops. Violence wasn't shocking, it was just part of the neighborhood. Inside his home, things weren't any better. His father, a Puerto Rican man working long, exhausting hours, carried a rage that never cooled down.
I diagnosed him with everything. He come home after being drunk and playing poker and losing all his money, and my moms would wake up 3 in the morning, cook him a steak, cook him some food.
Wow.
And he would eat it and be like, it's too much salt, and throw the plate against the wall. Yeah. Now, I'm a kid watching this type of stuff.
Joe once said his dad's temper was like a storm, quiet one second, exploding the next. His mother did her best to keep the peace, but the yelling and chaos became Joe's background noise growing up. Then came the night that would haunt him forever. Joe was just 10 when his father completely lost control. Nobody knows what set him off. Maybe money, maybe frustration, but that night, his father snapped. He came at Joe with deadly anger, and the terrified kid ran, dodging through the apartment, trying to escape the very man who was supposed to protect him. His father actually tried to kill him, and Joe later said, that moment flipped a switch inside his soul. When your own father comes for your life, fear stops being something you feel. It becomes something you fight. From that night on, Joe swore nobody would ever make him feel powerless again. He wouldn't cry, he wouldn't run. If the world was violent, he'd be twice as fierce. If the world was cold, he'd turn to stone. That was the birth of the fighter, Fat Joe's real origin story. After that, the bond with his father was shattered for good. His mom did everything she could to raise him and his siblings, but the damage ran deep. The happy kid who used to draw and crack jokes disappeared, replaced by someone hard, angry, and always on guard. Trust? Gone. Rules? Didn't matter.
The one that showed him the street life, and I gave him his first burner, how I taught him the ropes. You know, he was my son. I had him under the wing. You know, I would never...
In the Bronx, respect meant survival, and Joe was ready to earn it however he had to. By 12, he was already on the block hustling. Candy at first, then clothes, then whatever brought cash. The streets became his classroom, teaching him how to move smart, talk tough, and spot danger before it got too close. He also learned what real loyalty meant. And in the streets, it wasn't about friendship. It was about who'd stand beside you when everything went bad. But trouble came quick. Joe had a sharp tongue and even sharper pride. He'd fight anyone who disrespected him, no matter the size or age. Older kids started to notice that he never backed down. Some respected that fire. Others wanted to test it. Every day was a challenge. Either you fought or you got stepped on. Joe became known for his wild temper and constant clashes. Controversy seemed to follow him everywhere. But in that chaos, one man from the block saw something deeper in him. Charlie Rock LD, a Bronx legend. Older, respected, and already feared, he had prison stripes and a name that carried serious weight. When he looked at young Joe, he didn't just see another kid from the projects. He saw raw potential. Charlie took him under his wing, teaching him how to move smart, stay solid, and never let anyone take his respect. Fear? Joe didn't show it, not anymore.
I showed him how to rob people. From there, we went into the drug game, and and he used to be my little runner. I took care of Joe, man. Joe can't say no negative.
Under Charlie's watch, he got a street education more dangerous than any classroom could teach. Charlie exposed him to a Bronx most people never dared to see. Guns, stick-ups, revenge hits, the kind of world where one wrong move could end everything. The quiet boy was gone. In his place stood someone ready for war at any moment. But behind all that rage, there was still that same 10-year-old kid running from his father. He just didn't realize it yet. Every fight, every tough guy act, it was armor. Joe taught himself to live like pain didn't exist. But deep inside, it never stopped hurting. Every time he saw a family laughing together or a father walking with his son, something inside him broke a little more. Still, he buried it, because pain was weakness, and weakness could get you killed. By 15, Joe's name carried weight across the forest projects. People respected him. Some straight up feared him. He had built a rep for standing tall no matter what, but in the Bronx, fame came with a price. The moment you were known, somebody out there wanted to test you. In the Bronx, even the smallest argument could turn deadly. Just one wrong word, and someone wouldn't make it home. Years later, Joe admitted it all traced back to that night with his father, that near-death moment that flipped his whole life. That's when fear died, and survival became his only language.
I got shot by the biggest coward. When I got shot, the guy who shot me's puss. But the guy owed me $10 and I kept harassing him. I was picking on him so much, bullying the guy.
He didn't know it yet, but that same fire that kept him alive would one day build his empire and almost burn it all down. By the time Joseph Cartagena was 16, the Bronx had already shaped him into a soldier. The same blocks that once scared him now showed him respect. People in the forest projects knew the kid who never backed down. But with that respect came pressure, heavy pressure. Every single day was a new test, a new fight to prove he was still standing. The streets weren't just dangerous, they were a full-time job with no breaks and no forgiveness. Joe was rising fast. He had muscle, he had presence, and most of all, he had Charlie Rock LD, the man who became his father figure, his teacher, and his shield. Charlie had already done time and carried the kind of reputation that made people move aside. He was a legend who once took a shank to the eye in prison and survived. When Charlie talked, people listened, and when he walked beside Joe, nobody dared to mess with them. But Charlie's lessons weren't about peace. They were about power. He schooled Joe on how to control a block, how to handle disrespect, and how to make fear your best protection out here. Charlie always said, "You don't ask for respect, you take it." And Joe took that to heart. Under Charlie's wing, Joe's world started getting bigger and darker. He linked up with a local crew that would eventually become the Terror Squad. But back then, it wasn't about rap or fame. It was about survival, territory, and straight-up power. They weren't the biggest crew in New York, but they had the Bronx on lockdown. And if you crossed them, you paid a price, fast. Joe became the enforcer, the one people didn't want to test. He wasn't the biggest guy around, but his punches hit hard and his reputation hit harder. That's when the streets gave him a name, Joey Crack. Not because he sold drugs, but because, as they said, he was out there cracking heads open. And Joe wore that name like a badge of honor.
I got arrested, him and Tone stepped up and they made some money, but as far as like that, being a gangster and putting in work, Joe was never known for that. You know what I mean?
That new name, Joey Crack, made him feel untouchable, like all the fear from his childhood had finally vanished. But the streets, they always remind you who's really in charge. One random afternoon, everything flipped. Joe got into an argument over something stupid, just $10. The other guy pulled out a gun, And before Joe could react, bang, bang. 2 shots tore through him, one in the arm, one in the leg, all over a debt that wasn't even his. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just stared up at the sky, feeling the pavement cold beneath him, realizing how fast the streets could erase a man. 1 second, you're the one people fear. The next, you're bleeding out on the concrete. That moment changed him again, deep down this time. He lived through it, but the bullets left more than scars. They rewired his whole mindset. From then on, Joe moved different, watching every handshake, every word, every car that crept too slow near him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was studying the game, learning the Bronx's most important rule. Trust no one. No one could be trusted, not completely. And once Joe healed up, he went right back outside. In his world, staying inside meant weakness, and weakness could get you shot all over again.
I pull off, and then, he tell me his whole life story. And it was important for him to introduce me to his wife.
Yes.
So I went over there, I met his wife, and we talked. And later on that night, he came and got on my album. I put him on 2 joints on my album.
By the late 80s, Joey Crack had become one of the most respected names in the Forest Projects. He had some money in his pockets, fresh gear, and a loyal crew that moved wherever he did. But behind that flashy image and street pride, something else was growing, a deep hunger to escape. Joe had seen too many people die young, too many funerals, too many revenge shootings, too many mothers crying in the middle of the street. The violence was endless, and even though he'd built power, he couldn't ignore that quiet voice inside that wanted out. Music found him by pure accident. Joe had always been drawn to the rhythm, the block parties, the booming DJs, the rhymes that echoed through the Bronx nights. He'd freestyle on corners just for fun, spitting real stories from his life. At first, people laughed, but then they listened. His flow was raw, confident, real. He didn't rap about fantasies. He rapped like someone who'd lived it. Local DJs started putting him on stage, and every time he grabbed that mic, the crowd felt his truth. He rapped about what he lived. The beat became his new weapon, his way to fight back without violence.
Rockefeller and all that was Fat Joe's doing, and I played myself, and I was wrong. And you know what? I wasted 10, 15 years. We could have got money with each other. Because I ain't gonna lie. Ever since I with Jay-Z.
You been getting that money.
Charlie Rock LD had his back, but the streets didn't believe in dreams. Out there, being a rapper could get you clowned or worse. People only respected gangsters. Every time Joe grabbed that mic, he was risking his rep. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care. He wanted something real, something that didn't come with guns, blood, or fear. But the streets never let go that easy. Even as his buzz grew, he was still surrounded by the same chaos, the same enemies, the same betrayals. Friends turning on each other, cops lurking, rivals plotting revenge. The higher his name climbed, the bigger the target on his back became. When Charlie got locked up, Joe had to stand on his own and level up fast. His life became a wild mix, part rapper, part street boss, caught between 2 worlds. He couldn't fully walk away from the life that built him, even when it tried to destroy him. By 19, Joey Crack wasn't just a name whispered in the Forest Projects anymore. He was rocking Bronx clubs, earning respect from real MCs. But every time he touched that mic, he carried ghosts with him, the bullet scars, the betrayals, and the haunting memory of running from his own father. He wasn't rapping for fame yet. He was rapping for survival. Every rhyme was therapy, a way to free himself from everything the Bronx had carved into his soul. That voice, raw, powerful, and unfiltered, would soon turn him from a local legend into a national name and lead him straight into a world that would change everything, the music industry.
4 months in a cell and all I could do was think. I came up with the whole plan. And so what you see now, you be like, yo, Joe's a great businessman. Joe's just, I did it then.
By 1992, Joseph Cartagena stood at a crossroads. He'd survived the violence, the bullets, and all the betrayal. But even survival was starting to feel like a trap. The Bronx had made him, no doubt, but that same name, Joey Crack, was starting to feel more like a curse than a crown. On the block, he was still respected, but now people were seeing him as more than just a street guy. He had real talent, real presence, and real credibility. That's when his freestyles caught the ear of Diamond D, one of the Bronx's most respected producers, and a key member of the legendary Diggin' in the Crates crew. Diamond saw what others missed, raw talent buried under pain. Joe's energy in the booth was electric, larger than life. He laid down a track called Flow Joe, a song that told his story straight, gritty, confident, and hungry for more. That song, Flow Joe, hit the Bronx like wildfire. Radios couldn't stop spinning it, clubs blasted it every night, and suddenly Joey Crack wasn't just a street name anymore. He was a rising star. Before long, Relativity Records came knocking with a 2-album deal worth $50,000. For the first time ever, Joe saw a legal way out. He signed the contract, pocketed the advance, and promised himself he was done with the dope game for good. With his first check, he opened a sneaker shop called Fat Joe's Halftime, trying to build something clean. But just when life seemed to turn around, chaos came knocking again. His brother Angel, Jr., and most of their old crew got indicted by federal agents. Angel only escaped arrest because he happened to be out of town. Joe had dodged disaster by inches. That was the moment it clicked. There was no going back. Music wasn't just a dream anymore. It was survival.
Flip the switch and set them down a specific path. Joe, what was that moment for you?
I went to jail. At that, I've been guilty of every crime except for rape or murder. Everything else, I done robbed, sold drugs, scam, everything you could possibly do as, I'm damn near crime expert. But I literally went to jail for some.
He locked in, pouring everything into his next project, Jealous One's Envy. Then, one random afternoon, while grabbing a Diet Pepsi at a Bronx bodega, fate stepped in. Inside that corner store, he met a local rapper named Christopher Rios, better known as Big Pun. Pun was spitting rhymes with his boys, and in that instant, Joe knew he was witnessing something special. Pun's voice sliced through the Bronx air like thunder, sharp, fast, and pure poetry. His flow was so fierce it stopped Joe in his tracks. When Pun finished, Joe didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to him and said, "Yo, you're coming with me. We're making an album." That one moment changed everything. That meeting marked the birth of Terror Squad, not just a rap crew, but a movement straight out of the Bronx. Joe saw in Pun what he once saw in himself: raw hunger, street wisdom, and that unstoppable Bronx energy. Soon after, Cuban Link and Triple CIs joined the fold, and together, they built something powerful. But make no mistake, the name Terror Squad wasn't just for show. Before the music, it was the name of the same ruthless crew that once ran the projects, a crew known for fights, robberies, and revenge. Now that same fire was being poured into beats and bars, but the street code didn't vanish. It just switched arenas. And as Fat Joe and Big Pun's fame exploded, so did their confidence and their reach. The Bronx was never known for backing down, and Fat Joe brought that same fearless energy straight into the rap game. But fame doesn't come without enemies. And one of his biggest clashes was with none other than Jay-Z. It all started quietly. Joe believed Jay had jacked a beat from his debut album and flipped it for his own track, Where I'm From, without giving credit. That kind of disrespect cut deep. Then came the moment that lit the fuse. Jay-Z got on record naming himself one of the top 3 MCS, alongside Biggie and Nas. Joe heard that and felt snubbed, like the Bronx was being erased from a legacy he helped shape. The quiet tension turned explosive one night at Club Carbon, one of New York's hottest spots. Both Terror Squad and Rockefeller were scheduled to perform, and it didn't take long for things to spiral. Words flew first, then bottles. Witnesses say Big Pun stormed through the crowd like a storm, swinging a massive Rambo knife while chaos broke out all around. People screamed, ducking for cover, and some even claimed Jay-Z and Damon Dash got hit by flying bottles during the madness. This wasn't just a rap beef anymore. This was a Bronx-style street fight unfolding right in the middle of the music industry. Joe would later admit, "I regret beefing with Jay. All those years, We could have made money together. But by then, the damage was done. The fallout hit fast and hard. The whole industry started to fear Terror Squad, not because of their bars, but because their reputation was real. If you disrespected them, there were consequences. No warnings, no second chances. But that same fear started cracking the crew from the inside. While Joe was busy turning Terror Squad into a brand, his old mentor, Charlie Rock LD, finally came home after a long prison stretch. Joe showed him love, bought him a car, a house, even gave him a spot in the organization. But something was off. The bond they once shared wasn't the same. Charlie had survived hell behind bars. He'd literally lost an eye in a prison fight defending Joe's name. But when he came home, he found a new Joe, rich, busy, surrounded by fame and strangers. The street loyalty that once defined their brotherhood started to fade away. Whispers spread that Charlie was slipping, maybe using again. Joe called him a loose cannon. Charlie called it betrayal. Years of loyalty, pain, and shared survival came crashing down, and the streets that once made them brothers now turned them into enemies. One night, Charlie showed up outside Hot 97, where Joe was doing an interview, armed, angry, and ready to end it all. But when their eyes met, time froze. Decades of brotherhood flashed between them, and Charlie couldn't pull the trigger. He just turned and walked away, leaving behind years of loyalty, pain, and silence. That moment hit Joe hard. For the first time, he truly saw what fame had cost him. Not money, not respect, but family. The same loyalty that once kept him alive was now tearing him apart from the inside. The code of the Bronx had followed him into fame, and no matter how much success he earned, that code wouldn't let him breathe easy. By the late 90s, Fat Joe wasn't just a Bronx legend anymore. He was national. Jealous One's envy had proven his power, and Don Cartagena took him to the next level. The album went gold, and his single Don Cartagena was everywhere, blasting through radios and clubs across the country. Meanwhile, his brother-in-arms, Big Pun, made history. His debut Capital Punishment became the first ever platinum Latin rap album. The Bronx finally had its empire, loud, proud, and unstoppable. But behind the flashing lights and awards, Joe's world was tightening like a noose. The same streets that gave him his name were now watching him closely, and not everyone was happy to see him win. Success turned Joe into a target, fast. The same people who once rolled with him started whispering that he'd gone Hollywood. The same corners where he used to hand out cash and food suddenly felt cold, even dangerous. And the worst part? Some of those whispers were coming from inside Terror Squad itself. After Big Pun's death in 2000, everything fell apart. Pun had been the heart of the crew, the only one who could calm Joe down when his rage got the best of him. Without Pun, the balance was gone. Cuban Link started feeling cheated out of business moves. Remy Ma was torn between loyalty and survival, and Joe started hearing talk that people close to him were plotting behind his back. Fame, money, and power had turned Terror Squad from a brotherhood into a battlefield. Then the streets came calling again. In 2001, while Joe was driving through the Bronx, his SUV got lit up. Over a dozen bullets tore through the car. One round hit the seat just inches from where he sat. No one died that night, but the message couldn't have been louder. Someone wanted Fat Joe gone. Detectives grilled Joe for hours after the shooting, but he kept his mouth shut. "I don't know nothing," he told them, sticking to the same street code he was raised on. "Handle it yourself. Never talk to cops." Behind the scenes, though, Joe was moving different, quietly trying to figure out who pulled the trigger. Word spread quick in the Bronx. Some said it was about money. Others whispered it was revenge from an old beef. Either way, Joe tightened up fast. He doubled his security, stopped hanging around certain blocks, and never went anywhere without his bulletproof SUV. But the paranoia kept creeping in. Then came another scare. Rumors spread about a possible hit being planned against him, tied to an old associate he once helped. Joe tried to brush it off at first, but after a close call outside a Manhattan club, the fear got real. He started switching cars daily, never staying in one spot too long, always watching his back. And just when it seemed like life couldn't get any crazier, another storm started forming. This time, in the music world. The now infamous Fat Joe versus. 50 Cent beef was about to explode, and it all kicked off after Joe appeared on Ja Rule's track. In 2004, Fat Joe jumped on Ja Rule's track, New York, and 50 Cent took it personally. At the time, 50 and Ja were locked in one of hip-hop's biggest wars, and Joe's feature made him an instant target by association. 50 wasted no time firing back, literally on wax. His diss track Piggy Bank dropped, featuring a cartoon Fat Joe as a pig getting clowned by 50's animated character. It was cold, brutal, and impossible to ignore. But Joe wasn't built to stay quiet. During the MTV Video Music Awards, right before hitting the stage to present, he grabbed the mic and said, "I want to thank all the police here tonight for protecting us from 50 Cent's G-Unit." The crowd went wild, and he didn't stop there. He told reporters afterward that 50 was only giving him more publicity. Seconds later, 50 jumped out of his seat, yelling across the arena, throwing his hands in the air as security swarmed in. Cameras cut away, but everyone in that room could feel the tension. It was about to blow up for real. After that night, things escalated fast. G-Unit started dissing Terror Squad in interviews, and Joe came back swinging every time. The Bronx had his back, but the industry didn't. Promoters got scared, shows were canceled, and labels started keeping their distance. The beef was more than music now. It was war in full view of the world. Behind closed doors, some of Joe's closest people begged him to drop the beef, to just let it go. But Joe had spent his whole life fighting for respect, and walking away never felt like an option. Still, deep down, he knew the truth. Every feud came with a price. He'd seen it too many times before. Friends dying, crews turning on each other, bullets flying over pride. Now he was rich, but haunted by ghosts. By 2006, after years of tension, Joe quietly started stepping back from the street politics. He shifted focus, rebuilding his label, pushing Remy Ma's career, and finally expanding beyond the Bronx. The same fat kid who once fought over sneakers was now a millionaire, dropping hits like Lean Back, dominating charts all around the world. But no matter how far he got, those old instincts never faded. Joe once said in an interview, "You never stop looking over your shoulder. You just pray the shadow chasing you gets tired." That line said it all. In a world built on loyalty and betrayal, the price of survival was never really paid. And just when it seemed like Fat Joe had outlasted every street fight and every music feud, a new kind of war came knocking, one fought in courtrooms instead of alleys. In early 2024, news broke that Terrence T.A. Dixon, Joe's former hype man and longtime associate, had filed a $20 million lawsuit against him, claiming years of coercion, manipulation, and unpaid labor. Dixon accused Joe of exploiting his trust, and the streets were watching again. Their 12-year working relationship had looked solid from the outside, but the lawsuit told a darker story. The allegations didn't stop at money issues. Court documents laid out shocking claims that went way beyond business, accusations of psychological abuse and intimidation that left fans and industry insiders stunned. But Fat Joe didn't stay quiet. Within days, his legal team came out swinging, calling Dixon's story completely false and a shameless attempt at extortion. They insisted the claims were lies, saying Joe had always treated his employees and friends with respect. The lawsuit even dragged Roc Nation into the mix, accusing the company of ignoring financial misconduct, a claim Roc Nation's reps flat out denied. As headlines exploded, Joe refused to let the drama pull him back into his old ways. He kept his focus tight on business, music, and his family, showing up in public calm, collected, and unbothered while the legal mess unfolded behind the scenes. For a man who'd survived bullets, betrayal, and the Bronx's toughest lessons, this was just another test of endurance. Proof that the most dangerous battles don't always happen in the streets. Sometimes they happen in the system. By 2013, Fat Joe had already lived multiple lives. The hustler, the rapper, the boss, the survivor. But when he was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison for tax evasion, it marked a whole new chapter, one that would force him to face himself like never before. It wasn't the length of the sentence that mattered. It was what it stood for. A final reckoning with everything Fat Joe had built, lost, and survived. He served his time in general population, refusing protective custody, even knowing the risks. For a man who once ruled the Bronx streets, that decision wasn't about ego, it was about principle. When Joe walked out in November 2013, the fame was still waiting, but the foundation beneath him had changed. The money wasn't the same, the loyalty wasn't the same, and the circle around him had gotten smaller, way smaller. One of the hardest hits came from someone close. His longtime friend and right-hand man, Macho, was accused of stealing from him. For years, Macho had helped run Joe's business, so that betrayal cut deep. But instead of snapping back like the old Joe would have, he did something different. He stayed calm. No anger, no retaliation. He just cut ties and moved on. It was a rare moment of control for a man once known to react first and think later. Not long after, another ghost from the past showed up, Charlie Rock, LD. Once Joe's brother, mentor, and street protector, Charlie had grown distant and bitter. At one point, their tension nearly turned violent again, but it didn't. Both men walked away, proving that time and wisdom had finally changed them. As the years rolled by, Joe rebuilt through music, business, and maturity. His long-running feud with 50 Cent, one of hip-hop's most public beefs, finally ended in peace when the two shared a stage in 2023 during 50's final lap tour. It was a full-circle moment. Two former enemies showing the world they'd outgrown the chaos. Back in 2016, Joe and Remy Ma dropped All the Way Up, a track that reignited both their careers and reminded the world that Fat Joe was still here, still sharp, and still unstoppable. That success opened new doors, from his sneaker store UPNYC to new ventures that proved Joe wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. Today, Joseph Cartagena isn't defined by controversy. He's respected for his consistency. He's active in the community, speaks out about mental health, and mentors young artists on the power of discipline, growth, and longevity. The Bronx kid who once lived by the code of the streets now lives by a different one. Work hard, stay grounded, and take care of what matters most. His story doesn't end in survival anymore. It ends in balance. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and stay tuned for more real stories that hit just as hard.